I don't think
It's a
I
good
could ever
company.
fall in love with a
Cheers
black
to that.
woman. Park
Cheers.
Seo-jin said it the way people say things they have never been challenged on. Casually. Like a fact about weather. Across the table from him sat Marcus Obi, his closest friend since university. And beside Seo-jin, with one ankle crossed over the other and a glass of red wine held loosely in her hand, was Amara Diallo. She was also Seo-jin's best friend. Had been for 9 years. Marcus set his glass down slowly and leaned forward with the deliberate composure of a man who had been waiting for the right moment. Your 9th girlfriend, Haun, just ended things with you. Again. I'm not telling you who to love, but I'm curious. You say you can't fall for a black woman. Why is that exactly? There was a pause in which the whole table seemed to hold its breath. Amara did not move. She turned her wine glass once in her fingers and waited, her expression giving nothing away. Seo-jin looked at Marcus, then shifted in his seat with the ease of a man who had already decided this answer long before anyone thought to ask the question. It's just not something I've ever seen for myself. Marcus frowned. But why? Seo-jin's voice was measured, unhurried. The voice of someone who had filed this belief away years ago and saw no reason to retrieve it for re-examination. Different upbringings. Different expectations. Different worlds. I can't picture it. Marcus looked at him steadily. Then both men, at almost the same moment, turned to look at Amara. Amara was already looking at Seo-jin. Something passed across her face in that instant. Something quiet and old and carefully contained. And then she replaced it with the kind of composure that takes years to build. It lasted less than a second. Seo-jin didn't catch it. He never caught those moments. In 9 years he never had. Marcus always did. He watched it happen, watched her tuck it back in. And something in his jaw tightened briefly before he reached for his glass. So Amara said, and her voice came out completely level, "You're telling me that it wouldn't matter who she was. Wouldn't matter what she was like, how she made you feel, what you had in common. You simply could not fall in love with a black woman." Seo-jin held her gaze. "That's what I'm saying." Amara nodded once. She looked at the table. Then she looked back up at him. And her eyes had moved from feeling into something that looked a great deal like resolve. "All right," she said. "Then let's make it interesting." Marcus sat up straight. Seo-jin raised an eyebrow. Amara placed her hand flat on the table. 3 dates. Real ones. Not friendly dinners, not us just being us. You take me on 3 actual dates, and I'll make you fall in love with me. If I do, you admit that this wall of yours has nothing to do with culture, and everything to do with you. If I don't. And she smiled, a slow and quiet smile that Seo-jin had never seen on her face before. I write you a full strategy report for your soul expansion. Market research, competitor analysis, everything. On my own time. My own laptop. Seo-jin stared at her. Marcus looked like he might stand up and applaud. Seo-jin turned back to Amara. He saw his best friend. 9 years of her. Through failed pitches and missed flights and calls at 2 in the morning and the kind of steady, reliable warmth that didn't ask for anything. He could not imagine looking at her across a candlelit table and feeling something that friendship hadn't already named, sorted, and sealed away. "Deal," he said. Amara smiled. She lifted her wine and took a slow sip. Under the table, her free hand had curled into a quiet fist. "Before we go any further, if you are the kind of person who believes love does not come with conditions, that it arrives on its own schedule regardless of what we've decided in advance, this story was built for you. Hit subscribe right now. Drop a comment, and tell us what you think is about to unfold. And please like this video, because you are going to want to be in this community by the time we reach the end. Now, let's go back. Park Seo-jin was 34. He had taken his family's modest textile import business and rebuilt it from the inside out into a global luxury fabric and fashion tech company before he was 31. The kind of story that business schools would eventually study. Forbes Asia had done a feature. His board called him decisive. His ex-girlfriends called him present in every room except the emotional ones. Amara Diallo was 31, a strategic business consultant who had restructured failing companies across 3 continents with the kind of precision that made CEOs both deeply grateful and mildly terrified. They had become friends in their final year at university, and had remained that way through every version of themselves since. That history was exactly why Seojin was certain he would walk away from this bet without breaking a sweat. He had known this woman for 9 years. There was nothing left to discover that could rearrange what he felt. He texted her on a Thursday evening. Friday night. I'll pick you up at 7. Her reply came 4 minutes later. I'll be ready. He had booked a reservation at ARI, which was the kind of restaurant that required planning. Glass walls overlooking the Han River, a tasting menu, the quiet confidence of a place that had nothing to prove. He would take her, they would eat, they would talk the way they always talked. And it would be simply that. A nice dinner between two people who had always had nice dinners. Nothing would shift. He was sure of it. He pulled up to her building at exactly 7 and sent a text. Downstairs. Her reply coming. He looked at the entrance. The doors opened. And Seojin's hand stopped midway through adjusting the volume on his dashboard. He had seen Amara in every possible state over 9 years. Post-deadline exhausted. Dressed up for someone else's gala. Laughing until her eyes watered at something that didn't even need to be that funny. Makeup free at 7 in the morning eating toast over his kitchen counter. He thought he had a complete catalog of her. He was missing a page. Her hair, which was usually a natural crown of thick, beautiful coils, had been pinned up into something elegant, with a few curls loose around her face. The dress was the color of deep burgundy, structured at the shoulder and fitted through. And she moved in it with the ease of someone who had not dressed for anyone's approval. Her heels were black and unhurried. She wore no statement jewelry except one slim gold bangle on her left wrist that caught the light when she reached for the door handle and got in. She settled, clipped her belt, and turned to look at him. He was still looking. You look, he started. Thank you, she said easily like she had expected it. You look good too. Let's go. He drove. He kept his attention on the road with more focus than the road required. At the restaurant, they were seated by the window and the river was gold and dark below them. And the first 20 minutes were exactly what he had predicted. Natural. The shorthand and the overlapping sentences, and the laughter that didn't need setup. Then Amara set her menu down and looked at him directly. Seojin. He met her eyes. Stop looking at me like I'm your best friend. He didn't say anything. You agreed to a date. Look at me like it's one. He held her gaze for a moment. Then he sat back and actually looked at her. Not the reflexive, familiar, background kind of looking that had become involuntary over 9 years. The actual kind. She didn't look away. They ate. The food was extraordinary. The conversation was better. Amara said something about a client situation that made him press his knuckles to his mouth to keep from laughing too loudly in a quiet restaurant. When he finally did laugh, she watched him with an expression he had never seen on her before. It was open and specific and it didn't perform. It was the expression of someone who had stopped editing themselves for this particular room. A warmth so direct it almost felt physical. He felt something stutter in his chest. He looked at the river. When he looked back, she was already reaching for her water glass, unhurried, as if she hadn't been watching him at all. He thought, has she always looked like this? By the time the evening ended, they had been talking for nearly 3 hours, and he had forgotten more than once that there was a structure to this night. He had simply been there, present, which was not something he was often accused of being. Walking out, he glanced at her. You know this isn't going to work, he said. 9 years, Amara. There's nothing there to find. She looked at him for a moment, then made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close. You're very sure of yourself. I know what I feel. She tilted her chin slightly. We have 2 more dates. The car arrived. He opened her door. She slid in and looked up at him before he closed it. And something in his chest moved slightly without his permission. A quiet, half-inch shift in the direction of something he chose not to name. He got in and drove. 18 minutes later the car made a sound that was wrong. Then another. Then it stopped entirely. Seojin looked at the dashboard. This was just serviced. Amara looked at the dashboard, then at him. So, do we sit here? He looked out the window. The sky had been entirely clear. It was now raining. When he came out, she was at the small desk near the window, and she had apparently made something happen from nothing because the room smelled extraordinary. Warm and spiced and rich. She always traveled with a small pouch of her cooking essentials. He had teased her about it for years. On the desk was a bowl of something and a spoon. I found the instant noodles in the cabinet and supplemented, she said, without looking up. The night porter was very helpful. You convinced the night porter to give you ingredients. He was charming. I was charming back. Sit down. Amara, you didn't have to. It's groundnut soup. Sort of. Seat. He sat. He looked at the bowl. The color was deep amber, slightly thick, steaming quietly. If it's not good, just say so. He picked up the spoon. He tasted it. He was quiet. He took another mouthful. Then another. She sat across from him, watching the wall somewhere slightly to his left, her own bowl in her hands. He finished his bowl and set the spoon down. What is in that? He said. My mother's memory, she said, and then laughed softly at herself. It's just groundnut soup. She made it when things were hard. It's a cold weather thing. She started to say something else, then stopped short and let out a sharp, reflexive scream. The kind that leaves the body before the mind has authorized it. And she was out of her chair and across the room and gripping his arm from behind before he had fully processed what was happening. On the floor, making a very calm journey along the tile, was a cockroach. Amara, he said. It's a cockroach. I know exactly what it is, she said into his shoulder. It's on our floor. It's very small. The size is irrelevant. He handled it, came back, and found her at the far edge of the room with her arms folded and her expression that of someone who had recently survived something. Don't, she said before he could speak. I'm not, he said. He was pressing his lips together with considerable effort. She came back slowly, watching the floor with suspicion. He looked at her, this woman who routinely walked into boardrooms full of hostile executives and rearranged their thinking, currently retreating from an insect, and something moved in his chest that he did not have a neat category for. Something soft and entirely unwelcome. He thought the word adorable, and then very deliberately thought something else. Hours later the rain had grown serious. Lightning mapped the sky outside in white lines and thunder rolled in behind each one like furniture being moved across a large floor. The lights were off. Amara was in the bed. Seojin was in the armchair. Seung. I genuinely cannot sleep. A pause. Thunder. Since I was a child. I know how it sounds. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he got up, crossed the room, and lay on top of the covers beside her. She turned and rested her head against his shoulder with the immediate ease of someone who had made their decision, and was not second-guessing it. And he felt her take a long, slow breath and release it fully. He stared at the ceiling. Lightning, thunder. She tensed slightly with each sequence. Let me tell you something, he said. What? Stop listening for the thunder. I'm talking. And he told her something. Not a dramatic story, not a crafted one. He told her about the week he'd almost lost the company's first major international contract, because he had mispronounced the name of a partner firm's founder across a conference table in front of 11 people. And how his most junior team member, without changing expression, had smoothly redirected the conversation in a way that saved everyone's dignity. It was a small story. It had warmth in it. He kept his voice low and steady. Her breathing changed. He kept talking quieter, until it changed again into sleep. He stopped. He looked down at her. The storm moved light and dark across the room in slow pulses. Her hair had dried back into its curls fully now. Everything softened. Lashes resting against her face. One hand was open against his chest. He had spent time with beautiful women, women who entered rooms with the specific intention of being registered. Amara had never once walked into a room like that. She simply arrived, and somehow that was more effective than any entrance he had ever witnessed. He thought about what she'd said at dinner. Stop looking at me like I'm your best friend. He was looking at her now. He thought, I haven't been looking properly. Not for a very long time. Morning came gray and polite, the storm entirely spent. Seojin was already awake, staring at the ceiling with the expression of a man conducting an internal inquiry he had not planned to schedule. Amara opened her eyes, looked at the ceiling, then turned her head and found him already looking at her. 2 full seconds. Then she sat up. Morning, she said. Morning, he said. They moved through the room with the comfortable efficiency of two people who had silently agreed that last night was what it was. A convergence of circumstances, car trouble and rain and hotel shortages, and not something requiring further commentary. They checked out. The car had been repaired. He drove her home. And as she stepped out, she turned back and rested her arm on the open window. 2 more dates, she said. You seem very confident for someone who hasn't moved the needle, he said. She looked at him for a moment, her expression quiet and knowing. I moved it more than you think, she said, and walked to her door. He sat in the car for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Then he drove. For days passed. Seojin returned to his life with the relief of a man regaining solid ground. He attended meetings and made decisions and answered emails and was, by every external measurement, fully functional. Amara entered his thoughts at intervals he did not bother tracking. Though each time he noted the thought and set it aside carefully, the way you handle something you're not certain about. He texted her on Wednesday. No preámbulo. Second date. When this week? Her response came 11 minutes later. I was beginning to wonder if you'd gotten shy. Sunday works. He smiled at his phone, realized he was smiling, and arranged his face. On Sunday morning he texted asking where she wanted to go. He offered the rooftop bar that had just opened. A gallery opening he'd been invited to. A private members' dining club he belonged to. She replied in 4 words, somewhere with water. He stared at that for a moment. Then typed, define water. She replied, the kind ducks live near. He had not been to a public park since he was approximately 8 years old. He showed up. She was already at the entrance wearing wide-leg linen trousers and a bright wrap top, her coils free and full, a canvas bag on her shoulder and flat sandals on her feet. And she was buying something from a food cart before he had even finished parking. She handed him a stick of grilled corn when he reached her. No greeting, he said. Good morning, she said. Now eat that while it's hot. The park was busy with a pleasant chaos. Families, vendors, a group of elderly men deep in what appeared to be a high-stakes board game under a tree. Seojin walked through it with the mild bafflement of a man whose usual Saturday contexts involved valet parking. He found he liked it immediately. The unscripted quality of it. Amara walked like she had been coming here for years, which she probably had. She led him to the activity area, and what followed was the least dignified afternoon of Seojin's adult professional life and also, he would privately admit, one of the better ones. They did the swan paddle boats on the lake. Amara was better at it than him. She did not make a large point of this, but she did navigate while he paddled when instructed. And the boat went exactly where she said. They tried the archery range. Seojin hit the outer ring on his first attempt and said nothing. Amara hit near center on her second, and accepted the small compliment from the attendant with the grace of a woman who had always known she would. They played the ball toss game. He lost 3 attempts. She won on her first. She carried the small stuffed lion. She won under her arm for the rest of the afternoon with no self-consciousness whatsoever. By late afternoon they were on a low wall near the lake, shoes off, the kind of easy tiredness that comes from a day spent actually doing rather than being served. Amara had her face slightly turned toward the sun. I used to imagine coming here with someone, she said, not to him particularly, more to the water. Like, just a person who would want to spend a Saturday doing something like this with me. Seojin turned to look at her. The light was specifically good on her right now and he was aware of this as information. She looked sideways at him. It's fine. I brought my best friend instead. He held her gaze for a moment. I'm available, he said. Whenever you want to come back. She tilted her head. What if you're with someone by then? Doesn't matter. She looked at him and her expression went somewhere more careful. It does matter, she said quietly. It always has. I notice how different things get between us when you're in a relationship. He did not answer. She looked back at the water. Promise me something. What? Whatever happens with either of our lives, whoever ends up with whoever, we stay. She paused. You stay. Seojin looked at her and something in his chest reacted to the particular architecture of that sentence. Whoever ends up with whoever, in a way he had no prepared vocabulary for. I promise, he said. She nodded, satisfied. He drove her home. She looked at him from the curb before she turned to go. One more date. One more date, he agreed. He watched her until she was inside, and felt the thing in his chest again. Unnamed and inconvenient. He reached out on Tuesday. Third date. This weekend? He waited. By Thursday, nothing. He wasn't troubled. Amara had demanding work and non-linear availability. He knew her rhythms. Friday came and went. Saturday. Sunday. By Monday morning, Seojin was doing the one thing he had never done over an unanswered text message in his adult life. He was distracted. Marcus called at 11. Seojin picked up immediately, which was already an answer to a question Marcus hadn't asked. Have you heard from Amara? Seojin said without greeting. A pause. Why? She's not responding to my messages. Maybe she's in the middle of something. It's been 5 days, Marcus. She always checks in. Even when she's deep in a case, even when she's... He heard his own voice and stopped. Rerouted. I'm going to her place. Seojin. He was already moving. He rang the buzzer and waited. He was about to ring again when the main door opened from inside, and a man came through. Tall. Well put together. A kind of easy, familiar confidence in how he held the door open for Seojin before moving past him toward a car at the curb. The exact car of a person who had been to this address before and knew where to park. Seojin stood in the doorway and watched the car settle into traffic. Then he heard footsteps on the stairs, quick, slightly breathless, and Amara came through the inner door and stopped when she found him standing there. Seojin. You haven't been answering me. I know. I'm sorry. She held his eyes without deflecting. Can we step outside? They stood on the front steps. The afternoon was mild. Amara's hands were in her jacket pockets. Who was that? Seojin asked. She looked at him steadily. His name is David. We've been seeing each other. The words landed with the specific impact of something dropped from a height. He looked at her. It's been a few weeks, she said. Things moved. I should have told you sooner. She was watching him carefully. I'm sorry I didn't. Seojin cleared his throat. No, that's good. That's good. The words were correctly shaped, but something behind them had no structural support. The third date. She looked at him gently, and the gentleness was somehow the hardest part. I think 2 was enough. You were right, Seojin. The bet was never going to work. I should focus on this now and give it a real chance. She smiled, and it was real and warm, and he couldn't decode it. And I think for a little while things are new for me, I should pull back a bit. Just for now. You know how early stages are. He knew exactly how early stages were. He had done this to her with every relationship for 9 years. Had disappeared gradually, and she had always made it easy, always given him the room. She had never once asked him to account for his absence. And now she was asking for the smallest version of the same thing. And he wanted to refuse it, and couldn't articulate why. Of course, he said. Makes sense. She held his gaze a moment longer. Then she went inside. Seojin stood on the steps. Rain began. Not urgently, just quietly. The way rain sometimes arrives as punctuation. He stood in it. His jacket grew damp. He stood in it anyway, like a man who needed a moment outside of all his usual certainties. A moment in which to hold what was happening in his chest and call it by its correct name. He knew the name. He had known it on the lake wall when she said whoever ends up with whoever. He had known it in the hotel room at 3 in the morning. He had probably known it longer than that, if he was honest, which he was now being. He had simply been too certain of his own conclusions to revise them. The following week was, professionally, the worst Seojin had functioned in years. He sat in a Monday briefing and lost the thread of a presentation he had personally written. His chief of staff, a precise and loyal man named Young-ho who had never once seen Seojin drop focus in 4 years of working together, slid a handwritten note across the table that read, "Do you need to step out?" Seojin wrote back, "I'm fine." Then he looked at his own handwriting, and thought that no sentence in any language had ever been less accurate. He called Marcus that evening. Amara has someone. Silence. She called off the third date. She said she's stepping back to give the relationship space. His voice, he noticed, had shed several of its usual layers. Something was exposed in it that was not typically exposed. Marcus said very carefully. How are you sitting with that? I don't know how I'm sitting with it. That's the problem. She was supposed to be trying to win a bet, and instead she just stopped. She found someone and stopped like it cost her nothing. He paused. Like I cost her nothing. Marcus was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke, his voice had dropped its usual warmth into something more direct. Seojin, be honest with yourself about what this feeling actually is. Seojin said nothing. Because from where I'm standing, Marcus said. This sounds like a man who spent 9 years assuming a woman would always be waiting at the edge of his life, and is now reckoning with what it means that she isn't. Sleep, Marcus said. And think. Seojin did not sleep. He lay flat in the dark and thought about a restaurant and how she had said look at me like a woman, and how he had looked, and what he'd seen. He thought about a hotel room with rain against the window and groundnut soup that tasted like care, and a cockroach that had made her grip his arm with both hands. He thought about a park and the sun on her face and a little stuffed lion under her arm, and a sentence that began with whoever ends up with. He thought about 9 years of her being 3 steps away, and how he had looked at her every single day and never once actually seen what was standing there. He lay there at 2 in the morning, and the truth sat on his chest with the full weight of something that had been arriving for years, and had finally stopped moving. He was in love with Amara Diallo. He had probably been in love with Amara Diallo for longer than he would be comfortable specifying, and he had spent the entire time looking through her rather than at her, and building walls out of words like different worlds and can't picture it, and the only thing those walls had ever actually kept out was him. Marcus sent an invitation on Thursday. A formal digital card, designed properly, the kind you send when something matters. Seojin was mid-meeting when it arrived. He looked at it under the table. The words celebration dinner, and the names Amara Diallo and David Adesanya. Tonight. The meeting continued. Someone was presenting quarterly projections. Seojin stood up. Everyone looked at him. Reschedule the second half, he said. I have somewhere to be. He was out of the room before anyone replied. The venue was a private rooftop restaurant in the city. The kind of place reserved for people who plan in advance and care about details. The city below was lit and expansive, and the evening air was light. Seojin arrived with his jacket slightly open, and his heart in a state he had never professionally experienced, and would not have known how to describe in a meeting. Marcus appeared at his side within 30 seconds. He handed Seojin a glass and said nothing for a moment. Then, you came. Where is she? Marcus tilted his head toward the far end of the terrace. Amara was with a group of people near the railing, laughing at something someone had said, her head tilting back slightly with the full weight of it. She wore a green dress, deep and rich, and she was the best thing on the rooftop, which was a rooftop full of well-dressed people. And Seojin looked at her, and understood with a clarity that was almost embarrassing in its lateness that he had been looking at the best thing in every room for 9 years, and not once understood what he was seeing. David stood beside her, said something, and she turned toward him briefly, and Seojin's hands tightened on his glass and he moved. He crossed the terrace. People noticed. Park Seojin moving with that quality of directness drew attention. He reached Amara. She looked up and found his face, and her expression shifted into something watchful and careful and searching. Seojin, she began. I can't do this, he said. It came out without revision, which was the first unrevised thing he had said in approximately 9 years. I cannot stand here and watch this. He took a breath. I know I took too long. I know I said things that were wrong, and I built something between us out of assumptions I never examined. I know you had every right to stop waiting, if you were ever waiting. But Amara. His voice lowered. I am asking you, please don't do this. Not tonight. Not yet. The rooftop was quiet in the way a rooftop gets quiet when something real is happening. He kept going because there was no version of stopping now. You deserve someone who actually sees you. Someone who looks at you with full attention, and knows what they're seeing. I haven't done that. I know that. I am sorry for that. He held her gaze. But I see you now. And I would spend a significant portion of the rest of my life proving it, if you let me. A beat. 2 beats. Then Marcus made a sound. A laugh, sudden and complete and deeply undignified for a man of his composure. A laugh that folded him forward at the waist slightly and turned several heads. Seojin looked at him. Amara's eyes had gone bright with something that had been held in for a very long time, and one tear made it down her cheek before she caught the rest of them. And then she smiled. Not a small smile. A full one. The kind that has relief in it and joy and the specific light of someone who has been carrying something heavy in a quiet room for years and has finally been allowed to set it down. You lost the bet, she said softly. Seojin looked at her. Then he looked at Marcus, who was still collecting himself, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at the man beside Amara, David, who had taken a measured step backward, and was wearing the composed expression of someone who had played his role excellently and knew it. Seojin looked back at Amara. There is no dinner, she said. David is a friend of Marcus's. He agreed to help. She paused and her voice was even. Marcus has known how I felt about you since year 2. He's been waiting for you to catch up. Seojin turned to Marcus. Marcus raised both hands without apology. You needed pressure applied. I applied pressure. This is how friendship works. Seojin turned back to Amara. The tears were real. The smile was real. 9 years of history was real, and it was all suddenly legible. Every moment he had looked past and every moment she had waited quietly, and every ordinary Tuesday that had been something more than ordinary if only he had been paying the right kind of attention. He laughed. Quietly at first and then more fully. The laugh of a man who has been outmaneuvered by the exact people who know him best, and finds he is entirely grateful for it. He covered his face briefly with one hand, and then lowered it. You staged this, he said. I needed to know, she said simply. I needed to know if it was actually there before I spent any more years assuming it wasn't. It's there, he said. She looked at him. Amara. His voice dropped until it was just hers. It has been there. I was too certain of my own wrong answers to find it. He stepped toward her. I don't care that you tricked me. I'm standing on a rooftop on a Thursday evening in the middle of an elaborate operation you and my best friend designed, and the only thing I feel is grateful. Grateful that you cared enough to build it. Grateful that I'm here. He searched her face. Even if it took me 9 years and a fake dinner party to arrive. She laughed through the remaining tears. It was the laugh he knew best in the world, the one with no performance in it. He opened his arms. She stepped into them. And when he held her, it felt like the most overdue correction he had ever made. The settling of something that had been slightly off axis for a very long time, finally righted. He asked her properly 9 days later. Not the next morning, not in the warmth of what the rooftop had been. He wanted it to be a thing of its own, not an echo of the dramatic. He found a restaurant, a small West African and Korean fusion place that a colleague had mentioned once, and that he had privately looked up and thought about afterward. He reserved a corner table. They ate. They talked the way they had always talked, with the ease of two people who had shared a language long enough that silence between sentences felt comfortable rather than empty. He laughed at something she said and she laughed at something he did, and it was, as it had always been, the most effortless thing in his life. At the end of the meal the server placed the dessert in front of her, and she looked down. Written in thin caramel on the plate in Seojin's handwriting were 7 words. Will you let me be your person? She looked up. He was watching her with the expression of a man who had recently learned the particular quality of genuine uncertainty and found it, for the first time, bearable. She looked at the plate. She looked at him. Yes, she said, and everything else her face did said the rest. 7 months later, on a Saturday morning that smelled like coffee and the shea butter she kept on the kitchen counter, Amara Diallo and Park Seojin were married. Not a large event. Marcus cried before the officiant had spoken 3 sentences, and did not apologize for it. A small room of people who had watched these two orbit each other for nearly a decade and had maintained, with the quiet persistence of people who believe in things that take time, that they would eventually find their way here. Seojin held her hand throughout, and thought about a hotel room with bad weather, and a bowl of soup that was the warmest thing he'd been given in years. He thought about a park and a stuffed lion, and a woman laughing at the sky. He thought about 9 years of her standing 3 steps away while he looked in every direction except the right one. Amara held his hand and thought about 9 years of loving someone from a careful and patient distance, of choosing every morning to stay and be present and not ask for what she was not being offered. He was offering it now. He saw her now. He had promised her he would keep looking. She knew he would keep that one. And that is what happens when you stop letting your assumptions write endings for you before the story has had the chance to show you what it actually is. Amara did not perform. She did not become someone else. She let him see her. And when that wasn't enough, she built a situation generous enough to hold them both. That was the whole of it. If this story reached you, do us a favor. Subscribe because there is more coming and you do not want to miss it. Leave a comment below and tell us which moment you felt most. Was it the groundnut soup, the fake celebration dinner? Or was it the moment he stood up in a meeting and walked out without finishing the sentence? Like this video so more people find their way here. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the right love sometimes just needs the right moment to become visible. If you're new here, tell us where you're watching from. We'll see you in the next one.